Okay, so we'll just introduce what is the reason why we're doing this interview. So what's the main purpose? The main purpose is to build a teaching case for the course we teach that is called Organization 2.0. And in this course, we teach two elements. One part of the course is we teach MBA students some core principles of organizational design. And in this core principle of organizational design, we especially focus on innovative forms of organization. And clearly the GitLab is with its all remote solution and other type of solution they found to the typical problem of organizing is an innovative form of organization. And the other part is that we teach some parts of analytics for organizational design. We teach how to use experiment, regression design, and machine learning and simulation to better design organization. For this course, we're going to use a teaching case using GitLab, and our plan is also to ask students to use GitLab as a tool to develop the project itself. But except from that, and while we went through the extensive handbook, we also realized that there were some missing questions, and especially we wanted to, given your role as a CEO, we also wanted to have your perspective in terms of what does it mean to manage or remotely, what are the main challenges that you are actually facing, and what are future vision in terms of remote work, and what are the type of technological tools that you think about in order to improve the management of an all remote company. And then we also want to ask you a set of emerging questions that are coming from the first batch of interviews that we have done until today. So I'll start.
Great. And have you've already interviewed Darren?
Yes, we did.
Thanks.
I guess we did in the beginning of this week.
Great. Well, thanks for your interest.
So one question is related to compensation. So every company has to face this issue of redistribute reward across their employees. And one thing that we got from the interview with Brittany is that all members of GitLab vest stock option within the company. And we clearly know that GitLab is a combination of, it has different features, like on one side is a tech company, on the other side is a startup, and on the other side it's all remote. And so it's pretty usual for startup tech companies to offer stock option. So one question is, do you think that offering stock option is a necessary condition for an all remote company? And assume that you were not in a tech startup, would you still consider offering stock option given that you are all remote?
Yeah, I think there's two big considerations. So first of all is startups versus the rest of the world. If you're a cash flow company instead of a startup, then stock options might not be necessary. So stock options is an instrument for startups where you create a lot of value over a short amount of time, and you're cash poor but future value rich. That's probably obvious to you. Well, maybe not. Should I elaborate on that?
No, I think that part's clear. No, that's okay. Clear.
And then I think there's a big geographic divide between how people value stock options. When we try to recruit senior leaders in the Valley, we got laughed out of the room when we didn't offer stock options. When you recruit people in Europe, they almost value the stock options at less than 10% of what the value you're giving people, because they've never seen someone else get rich off them. So how many people are near you who have gotten rich off stock options determines how you value them. And I can totally imagine startups that give stock options in the US and not outside of that. At a certain point, we started allowing people to choose, and predictably, the people in Europe didn't get any stock options. We discussed with our board, and our board said, look, we've seen this movie before. Those people will be very disappointed by the time you IPO and everyone else gets rid of their stock options, and they don't. And they know it's their fault, but they still will be disgruntled. So just don't do it. Just give everyone the same and keep it simple. Also, it's kind of hard to keep track of what option people choose. So you run into problems where you promote people and you have to like re-up them and figure out what setting they choose and everything else. So we opted to keep it simple for prevent that disgruntlement. It's already bad enough that people in the beginning get more than people later on. It's fair, but it is unintuitive to some people. So don't complicate it further. But I do think there's a big divide, and I continue to be sad that, for example, people in Europe sometimes talk about their compensation and they don't even include stock options as part of that package, even though it's an enormous expense to the company.
But let me try to somewhat rephrase the question. One element of one value of stock option is that you link the returns for an individual to the success of the company as a whole. You might hypothesize that in all remote situations, there might be a stronger need for this type of solution. Do you agree with the statement?
I disagree with that statement. Okay. I don't see the relevance.
Okay.
So whether it's all remote or not, this would still be the way to motivate people towards the company.
Yeah, stock options are a useful tool in certain settings. I don't think that when you're all remote, people are necessarily more inclined to act individualistic or collective. So, I don't equate remote to lonely or individualism or lone wolves or whatever you want to call it. And actually, this is the most social company I've ever seen.
Okay, we are going during the course. We're also going to cover the topic, and we also study the topic of the use of algorithms within. We have seen that you are.
So sorry. Like I don't want to shut the conversation down. Like I'd be happy to elaborate if you're like, oh, that's weird. Remote is social. Why is that? I'd love to elaborate on that. I'm giving you strong opinions. Feel free to dive in more if you have questions. If you ask me a yes or no question, I'll answer with yes or no. But to give you a chance to ask further questions.
No, we are very familiar also with your strategy of creating, and we are fascinated by the idea of formally structuring and the informal conversation between your members. So that is something that it was very interesting for us. So we were somewhat struck by the answer because we expected something different, but the value of these interviews is exactly to get from the people that took the decision whether our hypothesis made sense or not. And in this case, I guess that our hypothesis made no sense, at least in your perspective. So that would be great. So we saw that you're using some algorithms in your organization, but mostly related to automation. So they're mostly a rule-based algorithm. What I have in mind is the danger bot or some other bots that simply relabel issues, etc. Do you plan to move to learning bots? So on bots that might take certain decisions building on existing data.
I've not seen a learning bot that is practical. So right now, we don't have any plans for that. We do try to automate anywhere we can. An example is right now, if you create a new job family, it checks automatically that you put requirements in and performance indicators. Any rule that you can have be checked by a computer is superior to a rule that humans need to check. So anywhere we can not bother humans with checking things, we try to do that and automate the tests.
In this respect, do you think that the superiority is just a matter of saving time, or there are some other elements?
It's saving time, it's consistency. It's mostly the tediousness of it. At GitLab, the software has over 100,000 rules, 100,000 tests. Imagine that, and we have over 100,000 commits. So imagine someone had to check those 100,000 things 100,000 times. That's a lot of work, and we save people that work.
Okay. One, we saw also, this is more related to scalability. We also saw in some of the previous interviews that you've done, is that your argument is that a non-remote organization is more scalable, is even more scalable than a non-remote one. Could you articulate more on this idea?
Yeah, so I'm not sure I would want to compete with an all remote organization versus a co-located organization if they're in the same room. Now, if they're in multiple rooms, it gets easier. If there are multiple floors, it gets easier still. If there are multiple buildings, it gets easier still. Multiple cities get easier still. Multiple states or provinces get easier still. Multiple countries, multiple continents. So the more widespread an organization is, the less they benefit from being co-located. While the all remote organization will have to adopt the processes you use to control an organization at scale, namely writing things down, recording things, working asynchronously. We have to master those things early so they become more prevalent in the organization, and hence they are easier to scale. For example, we have the best onboarding process of any company in the world. It's not perfect. I can see lots of improvements, but nobody else has 250 tasks you need to complete when onboarding. And that works better. Like, that's more useful at scale because we just hired 600 people this year. They all got to benefit from that. So that's why I think all remote organizations scale better. And that was counterintuitive to our investors. They thought it would break at a certain point. Instead, they saw it working better and better.
And I mean, taking your argument, what are steps? Sorry, go ahead.
The question.
Sorry, the audio was a bit garbled.
Phanish, we can't hear you well.
No, my connection is a bit unstable. Why don't you go ahead?
Okay, now we can hear you.
My question simply was, in these examples that Sid gave, where we're looking at large companies which are in multiple geographies, isn't it the case that they can occasionally bring together the people that need to be together into a room, even if they are across multiple geographies or buildings or rooms?
Yeah, they can. So can we. We don't do it because it's very inefficient. Imagine the cost of this meeting if I had to fly to your location or you're to mine. So they fall back on extremely inefficient things, like flying people halfway around the world for a 4-hour meeting. We don't fall into that trap. We have meetings that are more efficient. I bet that our meetings via Zoom are more efficient than meetings in a conference room. With the live note-taking that we do, with the agenda up front that we do, with the follow-up that we do, our meetings are more efficient. So not only do we have more efficient meetings, we also don't have the time waste of flying people across the world, of I see multinationals where you're supposed to be in the office, even if you're the only person in that location, just so they can check that you're working. Like, that is a ridiculous waste of time. And that is some of the biggest names, some of the biggest conglomerates I'm talking about right now. So no, they don't have an advantage. And they don't have they have the cost of it, and they don't have the benefit of knowing how to do remote, right? Because it's not in their DNA.
So essentially your argument is there is no possible benefit to a physically co-located meeting that cannot be replicated through an online meeting.
Of course, there's benefits to physically co-located meetings. It's easier to interrupt each other. It's easier to see what everyone around the room is thinking. You don't have the wireless issues. it's easier to look each other in the eyes. It's easier to kind of break bread before and after the meeting. It's easier to take a walk together or do something fun together. There are advantages. Those tend to not measure up to all the things. But we try to take advantage of that. We have that week in a year, we all come together and go on excursions and have informal chats during an unconference. As an executive group, we come together every quarter for 2.5 days. We have a very high velocity meeting, augmented with Google Docs, while allowing some people to attend remote if they couldn't attend. But there's definitely benefits. I don't think they're as big as people make them. Yes, I much rather see someone's face than not. So if this was a hybrid call where some people were sitting behind a table and I see like 3 pixels of people's face, that's pretty bad. I see your face pretty good. Our latency is pretty good. Okay, we had the disruption earlier. It was a waste of 2 minutes. Travel would have been a waste of 2 hours or 2 days. So I think we're pretty good. It's the biggest thing is that sometimes we need to take the initiative to interrupt each other, because that's kind of harder in a remote setting. GitLab, we solved that by making sure that we put the questions in a doc, so it's clear who has a question and who to hand it off to.
Okay. Marco, please continue.
So, what are is that? I mean, I imagine, and I completely agree with your argument. There may be a lot of savings and a lot of efficiency gains, but still, I guess that you are facing some challenges in scaling up. What are the type of challenges that you are mostly facing, and which of them? I'm sorry, which of them are related, and you guess that are related to the fact of being all remote? So,
Chenye, can you put the biggest risk links in there? The biggest problem is us not working handbook first. So we've got an amazing handbook that allows us to collaborate, that allows us to onboard new people, that allows us to think collectively. However, it is counterintuitive to communicate changes through the handbook. The default of people is, when they want to change, to send a Slack message, to send an email, to give a presentation, to tell people in a meeting, anything but making a change to the handbook. Because it is slower for them, it is quicker to use any other form. Because if they make it in the handbook, they have to find the relevant part of the handbook. They sometimes have to adjust the handbook to make sure their change will fit in afterwards. They have to go through a technical process and a reviewer to kind of get it enacted. They have to wait a bit before it's deployed. It is slower than any other option. However, it allows people that come with a change after that to build on their change. So it is, when they take that extra time, it's a foundation for the next thing. I think of it as bricklaying. So every piece of information is a brick. With GitLab, there is a well-structured house, and everyone adds to that one house. And we build a house of how GitLab works. And because we're pretty particular on how we build it, it has a strong foundation, and we can build it very high. In every other company, they send the brick into the heads of people. We have now 1,000 people at GitLab. Everyone is receiving 5 bricks a day that they have to add to the house they're building internally. They have to spend a lot of time how to kind of guide the different bricks with each other. They forget things are unclear. A lot of context has to be created because there's no context around where to place a brick. So every brick comes with a large packet of instructions where to place it. People interpret things very differently. It's hard to find things afterwards. So you can end up with 1,000 houses that look quite different, that are all hanging a bit, and where it's impossible, every time you add a brick to the top, kind of one drops out at the bottom.
Okay. And you guess that's the main challenge that you're facing?
Yes. Gabe, you want to do your spiel?
Sure, yeah. Prior to GitLab, I owned a company that was about 35 people, and we tried to do co-location plus remote first. So 2/3 of the team was remote, 1/3 was located in office. And to mitigate that, I made the decision that we were going to do a handbook first approach. But because that wasn't instilled in the DNA of the company when we started, it was near impossible to get the sales and marketing side of the organization on board. And so what ended up happening is the product side did it, but the sales and marketing side didn't. And there was no real benefits, because the reason why you do that is so you can understand how different functions work in a very clear, concise way, so that you can plug into their workflows efficiently. So we ended up having to abandon that, and it was really frustrating. And we tried a couple other solutions, but unless everybody in the company has discipline to document these things and maintain processes and publish when they make changes and be able to see history of how things have evolved from a process like function standpoint, it's really, 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 really hard to be remote at all, much less do it a hybrid approach.
Okay. So one question is, how do you somewhat enforce or incentivize the fact of contributing, given that for the individual it becomes more costly? How do you enforce or incentivize this use of the handbook and this contribution to the handbook?
Super hard. Basically forbid people from making changes in any other way. So if you send the email with a change, the reply will be, no, you didn't just make a change. Link to the change in the handbook. That's our source of truth. If it isn't changed there, there's no change.
Okay.
So a related question would be that, do you think anybody can learn to work this way, or is your selection and screening geared towards picking out the people who can?
I think what's really important in all remote is that you are a manager of one. You're not going to have the discipline of have someone expecting you at the office. You're not going to have hour-to-hour hand-holding. So you have to be able to work independently and manage yourself. An obvious other thing is for asynchronous communication, which is essential to bridge time zones. It is important that you can write well, that you are concise and precise in your written communication.
The two biggest, and we're looking more on the broad picture of all remote companies, and the two biggest all remote companies, to my knowledge, is you and Automatic. Correctly me if
yes.
I'm wrong.
And InVision.
Okay. And is InVision, I guess they have 500 employees in that ballpark?
I think there might be a bit more, and they're pretty special because they keep US East time mostly. Fact. So they don't work as asynchronous as GitLab and WordPress do.
And you both are mostly dog fooding. So you are developing your product through your product. Do you think it is a necessary condition for scaling at such a large scale in an all remote setting? And how does dog fooding facilitate the scaling in your opinion?
Yeah, I think it helps if you make the tools, because you can make your own tools that help with all remote. And people at the company tend to be more familiar with the tools. It is no coincidence that tool makers frequently discover new concepts, not comparing ourselves in any way, but like the Wright brothers were manufacturing bicycles. So they had access to a lot of tooling to make that, and they could make lightweight mechanical structures. I think that the tooling we're making is available to anyone. We're not using anything that's not open source. So I think that necessity is dissipating. I think the necessity that everyone in the company is familiar with the tooling is still there. And actually, we're kind of under-investing there. So one of the things we've been working on today is make sure that we actually train and test people in proficiency in using GitLab, because you need to use GitLab to make a change in the handbook. And that's something that is essential, and we're investing further in.
Okay, but would you see, that's another related question. Basically, you're also two software companies, mostly. Do you think that there are other settings in which all remote can diffuse?
So I think all remote is fit for all knowledge work. If you're dealing with hardware, it is not a good fit. So if you're Tesla or if you run a hospital where you have patients, it is not a good fit. But anything not hardware related, I think is a fit. I think you're seeing it in software first because it's much easier to adopt all remote if you do it from the beginning, and the fastest growing companies tend to be software companies. Second, software companies, people who work at software companies tend to be good with software, so they have an easier time embracing the tools. But I have no doubt that there will be journalists and other things will start embracing this as well. Hollywood talent agencies, anything knowledge work is digital, and there's no reason to be in the same location in the open office plan and put your headphones on. Like, you can just work from home or something near your place. And
do you instead have in mind some industry that might intuitively, so being, for instance, as you said, a knowledge industry that would instead struggle counterintuitively in getting all remote?
Sorry, I missed the last part of your question. That would instead
struggle in going all remote.
There's some things, like if you need a high trust environment, we all have reptile brains. If we meet someone in person, it's a different takeaway than meeting someone in a Zoom call. So what about, for example, banking? Banking is a high trust industry. It deals with money. Maybe we want to see someone in a suit. We want to see that they're taller people tend to be more successful in banking. We want that power handshake. I could imagine that they'll adopt it a bit later than another industry where trust is important everywhere, but less important than there. So I can see all kinds of reasons, relationship-based, many different things, but I don't think there's any fundamental barriers. And I think that at a certain point, this trend is going to accelerate. Already, like, it's grown like 10x compared to 3 years ago, and I don't see it slowing down.
Could I ask you to compare the trend that you are
Phanish, just
all remote, with a different trend which is becoming quite popular, which is non-hierarchical organizing? So I'm thinking about flat structures, companies.
Yeah, your audio wasn't great, but I understood the question to be about flat or non-hierarchical organization. That is frequently something that technology CEOs do. I think it is totally unrelated to the concept of all remote. I'll give my quick opinion about it. I don't think it makes any sense to run a business in that way. I think every significant business that tried that, and many have tried, has not had good experiences with it. I think it's something people would like to believe is true, but is not, unfortunately not true. At GitLab, we try to combine the best of consensus-driven and hierarchical organizations. There's a good link for that I see Shadows will drop in our leadership page. We talk about how we make decisions. Namely, anyone can provide input, getting the best of consensus-driven organizations. And then one person makes a decision, getting the speed of hierarchical organizations. The counterintuitive thing is that the people providing input have to be okay with the fact that the person making the decision will not acknowledge their input. If you force that, it takes extra time for the person making the decision, and you will see decisions going under the radar because the person making the decision, the DRI, the directly responsible individual, doesn't want to have to bother with responding back to hundreds of people.
May I follow up on this element, because one of your under the transparency value, the one sub, let's say, is the idea of disagree, commit. And while I can see easily the first step, so that there might be some conversation on how to proceed further, but then, as you said, there's the directly responsible individuals that actually takes the decision, and push forward and eventual change. And I would add that in that case, there would be also a manager or a maintainer that the merge request. Am I correct?
So the last part is there would be a maintainer or manager of the merge request?
There would be someone that accepts this, correct? So at the higher.
Yeah, so if there's a proposal, like frequently it's the person who has to do the work, but sometimes there's multiple people involved. So there's a couple of people who review. We try to keep decisions that are taken with a high frequency to like a DRI and to ensure that they're coherent.
How do you, so given that, okay, the first step is disagree and then commit. So that's the DRI that takes the decision and push further the idea. How do you ensure
and then
that there's a further disagreement? So at the next stage, you have a disagreement, even though the perspective of the others were not taken into account at the first stage.
Well, there's a difference between not taking people's perspective into account and making sure they feel heard. I think there's a very big difference between the two. And it's very easy to just look at the perspectives of other people. Like they will comment in the issue and you can read that. Making sure everyone feels heard is a lot of work. You have to now comment and say, oh, I understand your point, but this and that, etc. So there's taking into account versus making people feel heard, big change. So the commit is not just for the DRI. The DRI will decide what they want. So they're already committed. That's why the person has to do the work. We try to make them the DRI so they're motivated to do the work. Committing is for everyone else, accepting like, the other person is the DRI. They think something else. I don't think it's going to work, but I'm going to try to make them successful. And then the disagreeing is about the people who had another opinion are free at any time to go back to the DRI and keep advocating their cause. It's not like because the DRI made a decision, you have to now shut up and keep complying. You have to comply. You have to make, as long as the decision didn't change, you have to make them successful, but you can just keep nagging them until the end of time. Because if you care so passionately about something, that is a signal. That is a signal that there's something that might have been overlooked. And as a DRI, you will have to accept that people keep disagreeing with the decision, and that's okay. And you don't even have to write a big answer back every time, but it is okay. Some of the best decisions we took at the company were reversals of earlier decisions, and we think it's very important that you can always express what you think.
Can you provide an example of this type of reversals?
Yeah, so GitLab used to consist of GitLab version control and GitLab CI. So basically the create and verify stage as separate applications. That was all of GitLab, 2 applications that did that. And then Camille said we should combine the 2. And Dimitri, who we proposed it to, said, no, obviously not. These are integrated perfectly together, single sign-on, same concept of what a user is. There's no benefit. And he kept at it. And then Dimitri changed his opinion and they came to me and I laughed them out of the room. Obviously not. Everyone in the industry has separate apps for this, but customers want to mix and match. And he kept at it. He convinced me and we changed it and we launched a revolution in DevOps where integrated products are now starting to, we started that trend years ago. Now our most important competitor is following that. So that's a good example of where there was a quick, reasonable response from both me and Dimitri that was wrong. And it takes someone that has passion to just keep at it. And nothing worse than that whether you're right or wrong, not being able to speak anymore is the worst thing. Not being able to improve your argument is the worst thing. What we do sometimes say is like, okay, well, this is the data based on which these are the assumptions we make coming to this decision. Like, what part of this is wrong? And if all the trade-offs are exactly right and there's nothing to learn, and one person comes to A and one person comes to B and there's nothing else, then there's not a lot to talk about. But frequently there's an assumption you can challenge, or there's a test you can do, and other things.
Yeah, I was exactly going into this. So one other thing that we realized while doing the interviews is that you also have the value of not strictly a value as you define them, the idea of usually iterating a set of
Actually, it's one of our values. It's kind of
okay.
like all remote is not a value. Many other things are not a
no.
value, but iteration is one of our core 3 values. And it's super important. It's the hardest value to practice.
Yeah, because what we also somewhat realize is that whenever there's a conflict, so that whenever there's a disagreement on how to pursue further, there might be the idea of iterating that. So trying one attempt and then see how it goes.
Exactly.
Do you see any limit in this solution in the sense that it may drive to very short-sighted solutions? So it may favor short-sighted solution rather than more long-term solutions.
Yeah, with iteration, there's a bit of a risk of that. But the people who work at GitLab are so, I don't know, they care. They all have ideas about the future. So I've never seen someone do something kind of boneheaded where they didn't have a vision of the future. I think everyone has a vision of the future. The big problem is trying to take that leap. And even if you go into a short-sighted solution, if you take only a few steps, it's probably easy to dig you out of that hole. The big mistakes are when you spend a year making something amazing and then that pans. That is a much bigger problem. And I've used to be very skeptical, for example, on driving on key performance indicators, because I thought people would take shortcuts. But the clarity that they provide so far surpasses the risk of adverse behavior and perverse incentives.
Okay. So, and the other feeling was that most of the, say, conflict and disagreement related to solutions that were somewhat reversible. So this idea of iterating works very well when the initiative can be reverted in case it doesn't work. How do
exactly.
Go
There's
ahead,
the concept of one-way and two-way doors. So if it's a two-way door, you can just return, don't even think long about the decision, just go. This decision to integrate the two applications together we talked about earlier, that's a one-way door. That was many months of engineering work. That was a very big deal. So in that case, you try to do more homework, collect more data, get more opinions, debate it longer to make sure you're not doing that. So the trick with iteration is you split it up. But very frequently, you can split up things more than you think. I just held my first iteration office hours this week. 3 people came with a thing they thought was beyond splitting up. And in every case, they walked away with this is so easy to split up further. So I think challenging people on that thinking has been, is one of the main things that we can do as management at GitLab.
Phanish, do you have some question? Because I have others, but I wanted to check out whether you have something.
No, you can go ahead.
Just a heads up, we got 5 minutes left.
Say again, sorry?
We have 5 minutes left on our scheduled meeting. I just wanted to call that out.
Okay. So if we have 5 minutes, Sid, do you have any question for us?
No, I'd be happy to go, and I think we have 10 minutes.
One element that I saw that was very interesting was related to information flow. So I saw, I guess, a recent conversation between you and Emily on the fact that you are somewhat restricting for information across the different division and departments.
I don't recall that.
There was a conversation related to metrics. So the idea set of metrics better to be located into different groups rather than centralized into a single location.
So for example, the data analyst, should he be located centrally in the finance department, or should every division have a few data analysts? And I think that the answer we come to is as long as we can get them a good manager that really understands data analysis, we'd be happy to place them in the different parts of the company. If that's not the case, we place them centrally, but we dedicate them to a certain division to make sure that everyone gets their fair share of time and effort.
Oh. And could you somewhat explain how the corporate goal would decline to the individual task?
Yeah, I think that happens in two different ways. First is our KPIs, and our KPIs, there's some top goals, and they kind of trickle down. Some of the goals are repeated. These are the top goals, and some of these are like sales related. Some of these are people related. Some of these are engineering related. And then these are the top goals of sales, marketing, etc. So that's how they kind of trickle down. And now for engineering, they even have like sub goals of all the different departments. So they've done an even better job of trickling down the goals to the individual departments. For the OKRs, it's the same thing. So let's see where we're going next. Sure. Yeah, this is the current one. So I have a top goal, increase IACV. The CRO has goals, and then the field ops person has goals. So that's how these goals trickle down. You can kind of tell by the indentation how they are trickled down throughout the organization.
Thank you. So I have two related questions around this. One is the fact that a lot of this information is transparently visible to external people outside the company. That's clearly a conscious decision? Why would you take that decision? And second, do you think this will change post-IPO?
Yeah. So on the bottom of our strategy page, it quotes Peter Drucker, who I assume, well, do you know who that is? We try to have fewer assumptions. It's very hard. And he says, strategy is a commodity, execution is an art. So I subscribe to that theory where it's not about having the best strategy. The strategy tends to be obvious. It's about executing the best. And to execute the best, it needs to be super clear. Nothing is clearer than like writing it down explicitly and having the whole world be able to amend it. People need to be aligned to it. How can you have people aligned to your strategy if you only tell it after you hired them? Our strategy is very important. You need to be aligned to it. Oh, we'll only tell you after you join the company. I think that's bananas. So every company in the world does. If your strategy is really important, you want to make sure people buy in before they join. And that people that don't buy in don't actually join the company. And then the third thing is execution depends on people. And this allows us to attract the best people. We got over 3,000 applications every week of people wanting to join the company because we are public about what we do. Now, about becoming a public company, it will not surprise you, we made a webpage about that as well. And we don't want to go back in transparency. We never want to go back. So for example, we never released our financial information publicly because we can only do that when it's audited, when we're a public company. So we'll only do it when it's audited before we're a public company. I'm not sure we can keep everything the same. I think we'll add a lot of disclaimers and we'll have an S1 with a lot of disclosure channels, but we're going to discuss at length with the bankers, with the lawyers, with everyone else to keep as much of the transparency going, because it allows us to hire, empower, and retain the best people. And in the end, the people write the process and the process creates the product. And that is what the product in the broader sense, including our support and our sales motion and everything else.
Thank you.
Just a quick time check that we're on 4 minutes now.
Thanks, Shanye.
So, Sid, now it's time for you. If you have any question to us, otherwise we'll.
Cool. I think fairly highly of INSEAD. So I'm delighted that you're doing this case on us. Will there be a question that is asked of the participants in the case?
Yes. Most likely the question we are thinking of at this point is, in their opinion, what do you think will change after an IPO?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. I don't know the answer to that. I think there's a couple of things. First of all, you can have a lot of information you put out as a company, as long as you disclose the channels, the avenues you do so upfront. So we'll have a lot of those. Then Reg FD about a material disclosure is probably the most important one. So we got to figure out what that means for the company, and we got to get very explicit with examples and training materials. Now, there's a lot of things that are not material. Anything that has a first order effect on revenue and profit, so costs, that will be subject to that. But there's a lot of things that have indirect effects. And although there will be hesitance and people will want to revert to what is common in other companies, I think in the end, you want public companies to disclose things. And I believe that the regulators in the US are very wise. And I think they will recognize that investors in GitLab will get more information than ever before, allowing them to make a better empowered decision. And I think that that's going to be a very, very tough thing to do, but I would love to work with the regulators to get there together. And we'll see how far we get. And these are the early innings, so I have no clue, and I think it's an excellent question to ask your students.
Thank you. So best of luck with the IPO to all of you. And may I request that at some point when we teach this case, it might be great if you can join us electronically, just to interact.
Yes, I would love to. I've considered going to INSEAD myself. I did never apply, so no one knows whether I would have gotten in, but I would love to meet your students. They are potential future customers and leaders at the company.
Our loss, but we look forward to seeing you maybe in person, or if not, at least electronically on campus.
Awesome. Thanks so much for the interview.
Thank you all.
Thank you.